Numbers chapter 21 verse 14 mentions a book of God's wars. What is this book? Of all the portions in the Torah, the portion of Balak stands out as different. It doesn't involve any of the main or secondary characters of the biblical text, worship practices, or biblical laws. There's no Moses, there's no Aaron. It doesn't take place in the Israelite camp. It involves none of the tribes. It's about a foreign king who wants to curse Israel. There's nothing with which to compare this. Is there anything unusual about Balak? It would seem there isn't. One can imagine every enemy of Israel had kings who heard of the miracles associated with the exodus from Egypt and were nervous about a military confrontation with Israel and their formidable God. It goes without saying these kings would have consulted with their generals, astrologers, shamans, and priests to put together a strategy for dealing with Israel. This certainly would have involved having the priests and or shamans curse Israel. What Balak did is not only not unusual, but predictable. A summary of the Balak story is that he sought the assistance of a notorious shaman prophet named Balaam to administer the curse. Perhaps this is the only thing unusual about what Balak did. Balaam had a strong reputation as a legitimate prophet, and the Torah text bears this out, showing him regularly communicating with God, the Israelite God, during the entire episode. God cautions Balaam not to curse Israel. Then Balaam walks a fine line, trying to appease Balak in order to get remunerated, but maintaining a position that he will only do what God tells him to do. An angel confronts Balaam, blocking a narrow path, leading to Balaam repeatedly striking his immobile donkey, who speaks to Balaam. Balaam answers the donkey as if a speaking donkey is the most normal thing imaginable. Eventually, Balaam sees the angel and ends up blessing Israel, much to the chagrin of a despondent Balak. Nothing similar to the story exists in the rest of the Bible. It seems bizarre that it contains it. How then did the story of Balak make it into the Torah? Let's return to this question later and focus on the central question of the book of God's wars. When reading chapter 21 of the book of Numbers, we find the Israelites on the move following their beloved Aaron's death. The Canaanite king of Arad hears of Israel's approach and wars against them, successfully seizing captives. The people pray to God, who responds by permitting the Israelite forces to decimate the Canaanites in battle and lay waste to their cities. At this point, Israel continues to travel north, and the people notice the circuitous path they are taking rather than going immediately into the promised land, and complain mightily. After God sends snakes to punish the people, the nation finds itself near Arnon, on the borders of Moab and Ammon. It is here that the Torah inserts this most enigmatic verse about the book of God's wars. Quote, "Therefore it is said in the book of God's wars, Vaheb in Sufa, the valleys of the Arnon." Nowhere else in the entire Bible is this book mentioned. Nowhere else in the Bible are Vaheb or Sufa mentioned either. Moses immediately thereafter sends messengers of peace to Sihon, king of the Amorites, asking for passage through his countryside on the king's highway. Sihon mobilizes for battle, attacks the Israelites, and gets routed. Israel takes possession of his entire kingdom. From there, the Israelites fight against Og, the mighty giant king of Bashan, who is defeated as well. If you've noticed something odd, it's that the Israelites fight the Canaanites, battle the Amorites, and war with the Bashanites. It's a chapter replete with war. However, the revelation of the book of the wars of God occurs in the one place in the chapter where the Israelites do not battle. How can one understand this? If an answer is going to be found for this question, an in-depth look at the words of this verse needs to be undertaken. The first question one might ask is why the verse says, "It is said in the book," as opposed to "it is written." Doesn't one write a book? For millennia, people have been stuck on this verse, wondering if we'll ever discover it in an archaeological dig or have it revealed to humankind through some other means. It sounds like a very important and fascinating book. Being that the former slave population was likely illiterate, it makes sense that a book would have been recorded orally and preserved with a national historian who committed it to memory. But that doesn't answer what the book contains. The second question one might ask is why the Bible reveals this book at the one place where there's no battle. The answer must be that battles fought by people are not considered a war of God. It's true the Bible mentions the people praying for and receiving divine assistance against the Canaanites and Bashanites, but the Bible doesn't call those wars of God. Therefore, they must not be considered as such. What criteria would a war of God need? Something is going on here that has been overlooked. If the one place the Bible calls attention to this book is on the border with Moab, we have to conclude there was a battle against Moab where God was the only force in action. God waged war against Moab single-handedly. What war could this be? The entire story of Balak is exactly that, God fighting to protect Israel single-handedly. The strange portion of Balak, which stands out from all other portions, may represent the surviving chapter of the Book of God's Wars. It's likely the national oral historian knew other stories of God's wars, protecting the people without their even having to raise a weapon or put themselves at risk. These are the kinds of stories that could have shown the constantly complaining nation that their God was not only helping them win battles on the battlefield, but was performing great feats to ward off other enemies and preventing battles. This was a God who was constantly on guard for his people. What other entries may have been in this lost book? Perhaps the 10 plagues in Egypt were also included in the wars of God. This was also a case of God doing all the fighting. Moses and Aaron had a small wand-waving role, but it was God who turned the Nile into blood, who brought the locusts and turned Egypt dark. This is the paradigm of what a war of God entails. While evidence has been found on the Mesha stele showing Moab had a king named Balak, it is remarkable that in all the thousands of Torah books and fragments found at the Dead Sea, chapters 21 to 24 of the book of Numbers are missing. This raises the possibility that they weren't originally part of the Bible, but were a later addition. Could it be they were added from the book of God's wars? Perhaps the book of God's wars was never lost, but there for us to see all along. Thanks for watching.